Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the beautiful beaches of the last free state in America, Florida, the Message Time Studios. It is the 15th of October, 2024, and I am delighted to have with us today Elizabeth Rand, who is the founder of Mothers Against College Antisemitism, which is a group that was started. I'll just shut up. I love what you are all doing. Thank you for coming on the show. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, we're coming up on our 1 year anniversary. October 26th. We'll have been around for a year.
Mazel tov.
And I started it because I was in a number of Jewish Facebook groups. And after October 7th, I started to see all of the talk that was going on about college campus, about a lot of things, but college campuses in particular. And there was one that I was in that was it was called Mothers of the Tribe. It's still around, I'm still in it. And it was geared toward the parents of like older teens. So like the end of high school, beginning of college. And prior to 10/7, that group it was pretty benign. It was people talking about their kids' SAT scores and where they got in and it was also about Jewish life at different schools and just sort of benign things. And then after October 7th, all of a sudden the page just exploded with these concerns because it seemed like overnight these Palestinian SJP groups were just there, like they just appeared out of nowhere very, very quickly. So I kept reading this, for a few weeks and reading it, and I thought, I wonder if there's something that I can do, we could do as a group, other than just complaining about it on Facebook. So my original idea was to start this Facebook group and turn it into a nonprofit. And I did that thinking we would have maybe a few hundred people, maybe 1,000. I don't know. And by the end of that first weekend, we had 10,000 people. It was pretty shocking. It's just grown in ways I could never, ever have imagined. It's really strange. Right now, we've got over 61,000 people. And the group has taken a lot of twists and turns in the last year. I did file it. It is the MACA Foundation, and that is the group that will support the activities of our Facebook group. I filed it as a corporation in New York in January. In May, I filed the 501c3 forms, the Form 1023 with the IRS. And I am still waiting because they said it could take up to 6 months, which will be next month. But every time I go on the site, it's like, they haven't, last time I looked, they hadn't even gotten to people who had sent it in January, and we were May. So the IRS moves slowly, I guess, unless you owe the money, in which I guess
Especially if they move with the speed of light,
they move
and
really
kick down
quickly.
your
I
door
would, yeah.
with machine guns. Yes.
Right. So they're taking their time. I have wrestled with what to do about this. I think about it all the time. I have no background in this whatsoever. I work for an insurance company. I am not an activist. I've never been an activist. I do run a Holocaust group. And although I don't really have so much time for it now, so it's basically being run by other people. But I came into this with.
Can I back up real quickly? I think that's a really interesting thought, right? To say, I have no background in this. I'm not an activist. I'm always curious about that idea, right? In general, because to me, I mean, again, I write a Substack, I wrote a book, I published all of which, and do this podcast, all of which because I think it's important to cover this kind of stuff in the public square, which I think is everybody's obligation to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I get very nervous actually about professional activists, because if you are a professional activist, if you kind of solve the problem you're looking to solve, you weirdly put yourself out of a job. Right. I love when someone kind of quote unquote normal is just living her life with all it entails, realize like this is something really important that I need to pay attention to. Maybe someone else will, maybe they won't. But I love that idea that you plow ahead because you're not worried about, well, I haven't done this before. Who cares?
Right. And I think a lot of it happened is my son was a senior in high school and he was applying to college at the exact moment this was going on. And I've said before that had he been much younger or much older, I don't think this would have been on my radar in the same way.
Right.
It's just, I mean, I graduated from college a million years ago, and before he was, getting ready to look at colleges, I don't really think about colleges one way or the other. And one of the big things that I found out when I started this is people in the group saying, well, this is nothing new. This XYZ college has been anti-Semitic since the 90s, or, and I'm really, I had no clue. It just was not, it was not on my radar. And I think that in the beginning, what we were seeing is a lot of people yelling for a ceasefire. And in the year that has ensued, the rhetoric has gotten much worse and much more violent and more shocking to me. When I start, and as they have gotten, more obnoxious, we've had to really pivot and think, I feel like I hate to say it, but I feel like they're always one step ahead of us.
Well, because they're
And
professionally financed. This is not an organic bunch of people who feel upset. They are paid for.
so here's my question about that, because everybody says that they're paid for. And I maybe because I don't. Who is paying? Who exactly is paying who exactly? Like, if I'm a college kid in a tent at Columbia, am I getting a paycheck? I don't think so.
You're getting cash disbursements. Yes, they're coming from folks of the Open Society, which is George Soros' foundation. They're getting cash checks directly from the Iranian regime, funneled through Hezbollah and Hamas, who've been in
Do you
America
have
for
a
decades.
teenager? Because I think
Yes.
that if my kid was getting checks from Iran or something,
They're not getting checks from around. They're getting, cash disbursements or money to set up a donut tent or something from some benign sounding American not for profit. There's this one guy, and I can point you to the essays I've written about it, which is covered by the Wall Street Journal and others too. An American classic Marxist leftist moron who made a ton of money in Silicon Valley and has funneled all of it into benign sounding like the Organization for Mutual Peace, which funded printed banners on October 8th, 2003, in the morning in Times Square, which means they knew it was going to happen beforehand. This man is hiding in China. He's an American citizen hiding in China. So he's got the offices are on, and I'll put the name in the link to this. I can't remember right now. Offices on 6th Avenue, Manhattan, 3 floors, right? It sounds great. It's all about peace and understanding, and all these things are fronts for Jew-hating jihadists because the Western useful idiots are so stupid.
yeah,
They
they
don't
are.
understand that Hamas, once they're done killing the Jews, is coming for everybody else.
Of course. But I guess what I keep hearing and where I'm really struggling is it's obvious that there's money coming to them somehow, some
Yep.
way. I just don't think there are individual, a lot of these people are teenagers getting actual checks from anybody. Because I think they'd be on TikTok showing their checks. I think they may be getting compensated in some way, but I don't know. I can't
Well, the
wrap my
ones who
mind
are the
around.
paid professional agitators, they're getting paid,
Oh,
and
they
they have
they are.
got no need
They are.
whatsoever
Oh
to
yeah.
just show it on TikTok. They're doing
I
it.
I
Yeah.
agree. That I agree. And it is
All those
a
tents on Columbia University, you'll notice they're all
yeah,
the same. They came
I
from one
know.
source. Someone paid
Right.
for that.
That's right. Oh, yeah. And the fact that there are these professional agitators on all these campuses is also shocking. I didn't know until recently that you could just walk on a campus. Although people in my group, we have this group called the Maccabees, and they are going to campuses with signs. So
Yep.
that's been a little eye-opening. I know that my son now is at NYU and they have restricted all visitors. You have to be, that you can't just walk in there.
University in some way, right? How crazy.
Which is good. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
which is good. I mean, the fact that, of course, I mean, it works for and against me, right? I mean, it's good that they get rid of outside agitators because there's a lot of them. On the other hand, I like that my people have been able to go to campuses and that I think has maybe been a good thing for MACA. We did a lot of letter writing in the last year, a lot of letter writing. We have these like click and share things where you're basically, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. They tend to work when it's not just MACA, but when it's in conjunction with End Jew hatred and all these Pens and Swords and all these other groups. It will sometimes work if you have like 8,000, 10,000 letters sometimes. And other
Good
times,
numbers.
right, other times you're just ignored. I had this idea to send actual hard copy certified return receipt request letters. And I sent out a number of them. And the reason behind it was so we have proof that these letters were actually received if we wanted to start a lawsuit. There can't be any of this, well, I don't know, it's in my inbox, my spam. Well, I sent out the first four. I got nowhere. And, and some of those letters asked for specific meetings. I got nowhere. And lately, I'm really not sure. I think one of the things I want to do is have a march on Washington. And I looked at the form, it's 9 pages. And I think that I realized that there were Jews that went to Washington in November of last year. But I don't want to go there and sing Am Yisrael Chai and wave flags. I really want to demand some kind of action because I feel that we're being failed by the government and every level of government, state government, city government.
It's also important to remember where you are because it's relative. Here in Florida, Ron DeSantis outlawed Students for Justice in Palestine in November of 2023. They've tried to have a couple of desultory campus protests, right? And at every campus, they are shown a list of things like, we're not against free speech. You can say what you want. You're not allowed to exhort people to murder. And if you're quoting from the Hamas Charter, that's an exhortation to murder. You're not allowed to say river to the sea because it's not a benign comment. And so they tried a couple of times. My daughter's campus had a couple of protests, here and there. And in November of 2023, after DeSantis made it illegal, a bunch of them showed up. They were outnumbered by the cops. Everyone was told to ignore them, don't give them a platform. And one guy decided he was going to be the badass, right? You're also not allowed to cover your face in Florida. Not allowed to march around anonymously. And this guy got up and said, from the river to the sea. Campus cops took him straight down to the ground, broke his nose, and marched him off in front of everybody. And you know what? That hasn't happened since. We don't allow that crap here.
You're so lucky. New York for many, many years had a law on the books that you could not wear a mask in public unless it was like a part of a costume, like a Halloween thing. We don't know the exact words, but you couldn't walk around with a mask. Well, then COVID happened. And I understand that law is still on the books, but not enforced anymore because, you have the COVID mask. Now, I know Nassau County just outlawed it, which I think is great. I think it's wonderful. And we talked about that in MACA. And then, of course, we got the usual naysayers. Well, I wear my mask because I have, I don't know, I'm lactose intolerant. I don't know. I got something and I'm immunosuppressed. Okay, whatever. And I don't want any cops coming after me and this and that. I don't know how the law is written. I mean, I guess it should be written so that it makes it clear that you can't wear them to harass people or protest.
Judgment thing. It's a management thing and a judgment thing. Can you imagine what had been Columbia, NYU, all of New York City, Times Square, Union Square would all look very different if Giuliani were mayor, right? Same laws, different administrator. And believe me, the police would love to be pounding these idiots' faces into the ground and arresting them. They'd love to.
Do you think so?
I know so. The cops haven't changed. I know a lot of NYPD. The cops haven't changed. During the idiocy in Zuccotti Park, we lived down there. One of my best conversations ever was with a captain because, we lived there, so it was annoying. These clowns.
The Occupy Wall Street?
Yeah, Occupy Wall Street, those idiots. Yeah. We had, friends had to move out of their apartments because the idiots were drumming 24 hours a day. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so the week before they finally brought in the fire hoses and wood shampoo and fixed this nonsense, I was standing there talking to, and there were more brass there than you can imagine. So they were ringed with cops, but there were more white shirt brass captains than you can imagine because they wanted, make sure that nothing stepped out of line. No one got the image of a beat cop, cracking a
Right, right.
skull. They didn't want any of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And I stood there talking to this police captain who I knew, and said to him, just between you and me, how frequently do you need to remind yourself of your family, your pension, all that, to not just beat the crap out of these clowns? And he looked at me and said, brother, second by second.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cops don't want this. They don't sign up to have people
No.
walk into the streets calling for the death of Jews. They don't want this nonsense at all.
It is horrible here in New York. It is horrible. And our mayor is too busy with his corruption charges.
Too busy trying to
And
out-liberal de Blasio.
they're all like, being indicted on this thing and that thing. And it's,
The Jim himself is a delight, let's be clear.
is it like, I don't know.
They're
It's
finally getting their comeuppance. De Blasio's wife stole $1 billion in the name of a mental health program that went nowhere, and the media seemed radically incurious as to where all that money went.
Yeah, where did it go?
It went in her pocket somewhere because I've known folks who we're native New Yorkers. We fled when De Blasio was elected, delightedly to the free state of Florida, but we miss it. We love New York City, and watching that insanity. I spoke to lots. I went to school with a lot of folks. I almost became a doctor. Friends are heads of psychiatry at numerous universities and hospitals in New York, and not one of them was ever approached, touched. No one I know who's in psychiatry ever had a touch point with this $1 billion program. Like, where did that money go? To Gardner?
Yeah.
Anyway,
and then they split up, or they live in their house together, but
it's madness. It's madness, right? Anyway, they elected him the night he was elected. I looked at Rebecca. I'm like, the only credit they'll give me is not lying. They honeymooned in Cuba. They love the Sandinistas. The only thing in favor of this communist is he's not lying. He's telling you who he is.
Yeah.
We're out of here. And it's a shame. But as it happens now, right, the left, George Gilder wrote this great book about the Jewish test. Have you read this?
No.
It's phenomenal because he explains very clearly. And I've commented on this since I left the University of Chicago. For 30 years, I've watched Jew hatred and Marxism rise in the American university. And the two are intimately linked, not only because Karl was one more self-hating Jew, but because Judaism is the origin of the idea of personal responsibility. There's no such thing as group rights. There's no such thing as group guilt. And that's the entire Marxist agenda, is that we're not individuals, we're parts of a group. And so 90% of the idiots clamoring against the Jews in Israel, they don't even know why their professors hate the Jews so much. But that's the reason, is that we are the origin of individual rights and responsibilities and the value of that to society. And their entire program is designed to tear that down. And the Jews are standing in the way. And our kids now are bearing the brunt of this craziness.
Yeah, it's horrible, really. My son wanted to go to a really good business school, and we went through this whole process, in the spring. And he wound up he was like graduated third in his class, and he had a 1540 SAT, and he did all the volunteer stuff. And in spite of all of that, he got either waitlisted or rejected from a lot of different schools. And then Stern came along from NYU, and they not only did they accept him, they gave him 2 merit scholarships, which definitely easier on me. However, I really had to grapple with the fact that he's at NYU, because it's not Columbia, but it ain't great. And I started to write to Linda Mills, and I did that early. I think when they had graduation, they were giving out this. There were students out there giving out this pamphlet, and it looked very real. It was incredible, like the graphics. And it was a thing calling for NYU to not have their campus in Tel Aviv. And it was like this whole thing. And it was really horrible, And so I sent her this letter, and I thought she'd ignore me, but she didn't. She actually wrote back something about apologizing and this and that. And we've exchanged a few emails since then. And I'll tell you, she did me this huge favor because my son's original roommate, when he got his roommate assignment, that's another of my side hustles is I do deep dives to find people's potential college roommates. So they gave him a roommate who was raising money for Gaza.
Wonderful.
Right. Non-binary. I don't know if it was male or female. I couldn't tell. I was very
Through the roof after gang raping. That's the best part about these idiots.
That's also the irony, right? So I tracked this person down through YouTube, and then I found their Instagram, and there was a link to donate to Palestine or Gaza, I guess, whatever it was. And so I said, oh no, that's not going to work. My son has been in the media with me, and there are people who actually recognize him in the street. And I said, oh, geez. So again, I contacted Linda Mills, and she and some other person actually quickly, gave him a different room. In fact, they gave him a single and in a suite with 4 other guys who one's Jewish and the rest of them seem totally fine. He has no issue with them. So I don't know if she did that because she kind of knows who I am, or she just was nice to me. I don't really know.
Campus administrators a lot of credit in general because now I've been through college. We got a lot of kids, nephews, nieces, daughter, a son going in. They're actually pretty good about that. When you find an obvious conflict, they don't need it. Like their nightmare is something really goes wrong. No
Right.
thanks.
And
Let's
I
just
knew
move 'em.
that was just not going to work for him. I thought that could be dangerous. So they worked that out.
That's good.
But yeah, I mean, I want to sit here and say I have all the answers to fight anti-Semitism on college campuses, and I don't. And I feel like exactly like you said, that they are funded by, the Middle East. And one of the things that I cannot get over is this funding that college campuses are getting from Qatar and all of these places. That is pretty unbelievable to me, and something I found out in the course of doing this. And I'm not sure really why it's allowed.
If I can hopefully be helpful there. I mean, my degree at the University of Chicago was anthropology, Arabic, and Islamic history, and I've lived and worked in the Gulf. I've done a lot of Sharia financing. I actually restructured the Qatar Stock Exchange for them about 12 years ago. And there's my strong opinion, it's like I get into this a lot. People want to argue with me. So, like, I've lived happily in Muslim countries, from Morocco, worked in
I lived in
Saudi.
Morocco last year for 3 weeks. They were the best people. They really
It's
were.
wonderful society. The
Yes.
problem I have is with Islamists who are this radical death cult that want to bring the world back to a medieval period of time where Jews and Christians bowed and scraped and wore insignia and paid dhimmi tax, right? They're maniacs.
Yeah.
And the problem is all of their societies are totalitarian repressive regimes,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
they can't lash out against their government because they get killed.
Yeah.
So and the strong long tradition in Islam, sadly, of first adoring and worshiping the people of the book, and then later, as things didn't work out so well and Muhammad and his followers got more powerful, suddenly that turned into the Jews were the problem. So you watch the progression through the Quran about how the Jews are treated,
Oh, yeah.
and it's left societally a kind of latent, normalized Jew hatred that most of them don't even see. Like I've had people, I've colleagues I've worked for 3 years would say something like that sounds Jewish, like in a meeting, without remotely thinking that's offensive.
Right.
And then when they catch themselves, like, oh, I mean,
Yeah.
like I know what you meant.
Yeah.
So
But I mean, Morocco is a good example of that. You can be a Muslim and not be a terrorist, not be
most but the problem is if you're looking at 0.01% of a $1.6 billion population, that's a lot of people who are
Yeah.
thoroughly convinced that God wants them to kill infidels. That's a lot of people.
It is. I mean, look at 9/11, right? I'm a survivor of September 11th. I used to live down there. I lived in the zone,
Yep.
and I had
Down in
cancer.
New York City. I had a meeting the next day at 9:30 at Bridge Markets on September 12th. So I would have been in the towers. I would, same thing. Absolutely.
So, I mean, and of course, all of these all of these students didn't live through it and they don't have that as a memory, so that's another thing that I think might be responsible for it. But the foreign funding is just, it's incredible. I mean, like, I work for a company and I have to do one now, like it's about gifts and entertainment, have to do these compliance things once a year. And they're so strict about, 10 cents coming from some government, and you can't give anybody anything, give them a mug, or a pen. And
Maybe.
it's so interesting to me. Like, I've always worked in the corporate world. I've never worked in academia. And it's so incredible what they do and what they get away with, and
Oh, yeah.
how
They're money
Harvard.
whores. They'll take the money. If someone's going to stroke a big check, they'll take it. Oh, yeah.
And I have never completely understood, like, why does Qatar want to give billions to Harvard? Or, like, why, and I admit I have a lot of ignorance about all this. What is the motive? So that they can gradually overthrow the country by getting these kids brainwashed? I don't even know. It's so
It's
bizarre.
interesting. I mean, because I've been in this space a long time, and I would suggest that predominantly most people's motives are fairly benign. For the same reason America spreads foreign aid around the world to further interests. I do know that, especially because I was doing a lot of lecturing on Sharia finance and Sharia norms for Western financial audiences a lot in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Jeddah. Um, in London, gave a lot of talks there, that predominantly the most of the people who were involved, and especially came from bigger institutions that came out of the United Arab Emirates, from Saudi or Qatar or Oman, their primary concern was in the West, there's a very negative image of Islam. Now, arguably because, the Moors took slaves, right? I mean, like there's a long history between the three Abrahamic religions that is not often very peaceful. And so, on the positive side, I would say um, it was just you're going to endow a chair in Middle East studies and Islamic history at the University of Chicago, so people who want to learn more about that can. Okay, that I don't find anything objectionable about that. So I don't immediately jump to the horror that, oh my God, these Arabs are giving, the Muslims are giving money to universities. For the most part, no, they're not trying to overthrow the U.S. government. I don't think anyone's got that vision. Are there zealots and ideologues who are drawn to that vehicle and hide their true intention to try to influence? I'm sure there are. Sure there are. But the idea that we should start yelling at the campus Islamic Center the way these maniacs are yelling at Hillel or Chabad is not worth the effort in my
But do
mind.
you think that part of the reason that campus administrators in a lot of cases are reticent to crack down on these groups is because they're getting so much money from them? Because if so, then that's a problem.
Yeah, it's
They're
probably
being
true, but
influenced.
G. Gordon Liddy, after Watergate, and he went to prison, he said one of the best things ever is that it's easy to keep a secret between two people if one of them is dead, right? So the idea that a middle class compensated bureaucrat is going to collude with a dozen others who themselves don't get an extra dollar, whether they defend the Qatar fund or not, right? I just don't. I just don't buy that. It's more of I'd say a cultural thing. The left leaning drift to the universities, which began, God, who is that? That Bill Ayers, the Weather Underground, that lunatic, right?
Oh,
He
yes.
happened to have gone to high school with a good friend of mine who now lives in New York, and he was telling me if Bill Ayers had been a middle class kid and those bombs had gone off from Students for a Democratic Society, again, they always name these things so nicely, don't they? Marxists and the Weather Underground, he would be in jail to this day. But Bill's father was a rich insurance executive in Chicago, politically connected, and got him off to the great detriment of America forever.
During Vietnam, was that his thing?
That was it. The Students for Democratic Society and the Weather Underground. And his wife, Bernadine Dorn, their kid, Chesa Boudin, became the Attorney General in San Francisco, District Attorney in San Francisco a few years ago. Bill set out, and he told my friend Chris deliberately, after the trial of their backyard in Winnetka, Illinois, that he and his fellow Marxists were going to emulate the Society of Jesus in the Catholic Church. If you want to change the future, you change the next generation, you go into education. And they deliberately went into education, along with all the draft dodgers who got deferments instead of going to Vietnam. So you had this massive, deliberate push to the hard left in our universities that most normal people didn't know was happening. And now, and I've been writing and talking about this for 20 years, and I'm that guy that people would edge away from at cocktail parties if you got me started on this, right? But I'm right. I'm sadly right. I wish I weren't. But after October 7th, they came bursting out. This was their moment. They're going to point to the white Israelis who aren't fighting the black Palestinians who aren't, and the oppressor colonialist bullshit they've been yapping about for decades all came to fruition. And here we are. We've got a leftist dominated university system, and their ideology is decidedly neo-Marxist. They're not lying about it. They talk about it, and here we are. And the Marxists hate God, hate religion, don't like freedom, hate individuality.
Yeah, but come on. The Vietnam War was an unjust war. Come on. I went
Whether it
to
was or not, the stupidity we made was allowing kids who could pay for it to avoid the draft by going to college. The biggest policy mistake this nation ever made, in my opinion.
here. Tell me what you think, why we should have been in a civil war between
Whether or not we should have been in the war or not, I completely agree we shouldn't have been there. But the fact is, we went. And you go to every university in this country, depending upon their age. You start at William and Mary, right? You've got memorials to Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War I, World War II, Korea, and then they peter out, right? And when you allow someone to buy themselves out of going to war when everyone else has to go, that created the seeds of one of the biggest schisms this country still has not recovered from. Rich kids hid, poor kids went, and that was a disaster for this country.
So what do you think should have happened then?
Either there's a draft or there isn't a draft. You're able-bodied, you go. If you're not, you don't. That's it.
The voting age at that time was 21.
Right.
It didn't change until what, 1972? Which
they flipped it. So now you can go die for your country, but you can't have a beer on the way out.
Well, that's true. In fact, that's what my group is named after, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. That's where I got the inspiration, because that was a single mother, not single, unmarried, one person, and she she had a daughter who was 13 and had been killed by a drunk driver in California, and the guy who killed her had several DUIs on his record, and he was still out there driving a car, and he killed her. So she wanted to do something about it, and she was just this ordinary person. She was not an activist, same thing, right? And I was really, really inspired by what she did, because it was just ordinary people.
Yep.
And, it took them 8 years, but they did manage to get the federal, to make it federal law that it's 21 now in every single state. So, and where am I going with this? So, yeah, I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that they have been incredibly successful in reducing deaths and accidents from drunk driving. As far as Vietnam, well, I guess we're going to have to agree to disagree. I guess there shouldn't have been a draft.
Well, there are two separate issues, whether we should have been in the war or not. And then once we are, how does the nation bear the brunt of that equitably? To me, those are two separate issues entirely.
Has there been a war where has there ever been a war where it was just volunteerism? Has there ever been a war without a mandatory draft?
20 years wasting time in Afghanistan and Iraq. We've had an all-volunteer army ever since Vietnam for that very reason. And
so Desert Storm and all of that.
That's all volunteer.
Okay.
I do a lot of work with the military, and everyone who signs up, they've got their own reasons for doing so.
Yeah.
Fierce patriots. Many of them have no idea what they're getting into. I mean, that's the reality of it. We deal a lot on the back end with veterans because, but these, thank God for the people we have who are doing their job.
Yeah.
And I don't think draft's a good idea at all, right? Because you get this weird adverse selection and the rest of it. But my only point about that was the societal schism that arose because of that choice was terrible, was absolutely terrible. that you could buy yourself out of service. And a lot of them, because the war went on for 10 years, daddy bought him a bachelor's degree, right? Then,
Yeah.
Jesus, the war's still going. I guess you're going to get a master's. Oh my God, it's still going on. I guess we're going to get a PhD. So we ended up with these cowards who never grew up in a societal sense, who stayed in the universities. And I just say that from an anthropological perspective, there are hurdles to adulthood in every different society. And when you dodge the draft, you never became a man in this country, and you think like a child. And that's what we got. Those are the people teaching our children, and it's been a disaster. And I don't know how we go get around that.
I don't
But
know. Well, I've never drawn that correlation before. I've never even thought of it because one of the things I hate is when people compare what's going on now to prior protests like Vietnam or apartheid or whatever any
yeah,
other issue, because this is really different. We are looking at people protesting us as an ethnic group.
yep,
The Vietnam
who have been
War
attacked.
getting that, yeah, right.
Yeah,
Whereas Vietnam War protesters or the apartheid, that was about government actions in that wars, the government actions in South Africa.
yep.
But it wasn't like, well, if you're a South African or you're a Vietnamese student, oh boy, you better watch out. I mean, they didn't attack actual students, and this is really shocking. Like some of the things that I've seen, especially at UCLA and Columbia. I mean, incredible, and it's horrible, and it seems to get mostly worse, although not completely. I mean, there have been schools that are trying to do the right thing. I mean, NYU actually did come out with a whole new code of conduct that specifically, said that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, more or less. Right. And that was a good start. And there have been other schools where they have gotten, voted down BDS legislation, which is a whole other crazy thing that I don't understand because don't we have 38 states that disallow BDS anyway? Like
Yeah,
what is like
because
being
it's
upset voted for BDS, but where? New York disallows it. So I don't really understand. Is that a symbolic thing? Like
no,
they
they mean it. I mean, this is a full frontal assault. The Israel is a thorn in the side of totalitarian governments who live side by side. The Israelis have this insanely prosperous society where everything's free and all the horrors that the totalitarian dictators tell their Muslim populations will happen. Um, well, I mean, what do you mean? There's a pride parade. There are men kissing in the streets. Women are allowed to show half an inch of hair without getting beaten to death by the religious police, right? Their greatest fear. And this last year, at the same time, the UN. I happened to be sitting in New York in the office of very powerful member of the Jewish community globally. We're celebrating. One of Netanyahu's staff was there with us, celebrating the fact that the Israelis and Saudis had just had such a series of very productive conversations to
yeah.
advance the Abraham Accords. And the
Mhm.
Iranians saw this and they had to act. October 7th was Iran saying, we have to put a vast divide between the Muslim world and the Jewish world, or we're dead. And the problem is they've misread the tea leaves, and the Ayatollahs will be hanging from the streets within a year. The Marines, there are 40,000 sitting on carrier groups. They all want payback from Beirut in the 80s. Like the American military memory is long, and they will. If Trump were in power, first off, this wouldn't have happened. If a Republican were in power, and I think you get into Trump versus
Do you think
Biden,
if a Republican were in power, that October 7th would not have
I
happened?
think it wouldn't have happened. And even had it happened, Tehran would already be a flattened ghost land. This is World War III, in my opinion. This will end. When this ends, my opinion, an Orthodox Jewish couple sitting in Casablanca can decide to stand up and take a walking vacation along the entire Mediterranean rim to Istanbul, and all anyone will do is offer them tea on the way. That is what I believe will happen at the end of this, and it's going to get
Really?
worse and larger before it gets better.
Yeah. My late father used to say that he would hope things would get worse because that was the only way they would get better, something to that effect.
Yep.
So how do you, I mean, that's, and I'm sure you've seen these old pictures from the 1970s of what these countries look like, or
It was like Paris in 1950.
yes, yes, when they were Christian countries or they were not yet
They were
radicalized.
still secular, and it was Muslim. Turkey has always been a Muslim country predominantly. But if you read, Parmak's books, and anyway, I mean, everyone who lived there up until 20 years ago when the Islamists began to come into power, and we should listen to them when everyone's going on about Gaza's an opening a prison, one of their stupid non-talking points. That wall between Rafah and Egypt, that is every far-right MAGA Republican's dream for a southern border. You couldn't get a mouse through that
Well,
wall.
don't get me started. For the last 13 months, I've been living next to the largest migrant center in New York. I'm a few blocks from Randall's Island. And well, first of all, I'm looking to move, and that's one of the reasons. Although they're taking that down February 28th, they are. So I have taken a series of pictures because I've been in Mombasa, and I put up the picture, Mombasa or Randall's Island, and you got to get, because you get it, and people have been wrong because they do look very similar. So, there is this giant white structure for these migrants. Okay. So the summer comes and it gets hot out, and they decide, I guess it's hot or it's uncomfortable in this giant tent. So what do? They come out with their own tents. And pretty soon Randall's Island looks like Colombia. So there's tents everywhere. And I still remember this morning, I went running with my husband on a morning in July, and it was like sunrise. And we go up this ramp, get out there. It looked like a campground in Idaho or something. Tents everywhere. There's clothes hanging from trees. There's guys like bathing themselves in the water. And then at night, it becomes like an open air market. It looks like a third world country, and I've been in a number of them.
Yep.
And it is just people. There's guys walking around selling loose joints. They're all selling like candy and things, and you don't know where they got that. And a large amount of them have motorized vehicles of some sort, motorbikes,
Sure.
and you just it's unbelievably shocking what's going on there. It is unbelievably shocking, and I'm so bothered by it because they're here illegally and we don't know who they are.
Yep.
We don't know. We don't
And
know who
that's the other part, which is very disturbing, written about, certainly not the only one. 800,000 men of military age, single, came across our border in the last 3.5 years from 20 countries on the terror watch list. And so the number of guys I know that run training camps and rifle ranges and the rest of it in Texas, Georgia, elsewhere, they have reported a spike of hundreds of percentage points of people who've shown up without proper ID, who want to let me train on that 50 cal. No, get out of here. So there is my biggest concern as World War III unfolds is Hamas, Hezbollah. They've been here for decades, and when they decide to start shooting people in the middle of New York City, it's a horrible, macabre game I play with a bunch of military friends. How many tens of thousands of people will they kill before the NYPD or anyone else can marshal the resources to subdue 20 highly trained military veterans who've come from Afghanistan, heavily armed, and on the Upper East Side to say Metropolitan Museum is ground zero and we're going to take out blocks? Who's going to stop them within 10 hours, 20 hours?
definitely
No
making
one.
me feel great.
No, I
Yeah,
mean
no,
it's a horrible thing, but that's what's coming. We got so used to, even despite September 11th, other attacks that have happened here subsequently, right? The national memory is still Fortress America. There's two big oceans. That means nothing anymore. This administration let hundreds of thousands of military-aged young men into this country, and if even only 1% of them, that's 8,000 people. Look what 19 men did on September 11th. So I am very concerned, and everyone I know, for what it's worth, who works in military intelligence, they all live in such insanely remote places that they make my beach town look like Manhattan. They don't want to be anywhere near a population center. Their families, anywhere near them.
yeah, it's frightening. It's unbelievably frightening. I think about becoming an expat all the time, but I wouldn't leave my son here, and I don't really know where I'd go. I mean, I've actually kind of gone and done a search to see like where can I really go, and well, maybe Portugal. It seems like it seems like if you work for an American company and you're retired and you have private insurance or you're on Medicare, it's a lot easier,
Yeah.
like if you're not going to be a drain on a country's resources.
Yep.
And I
They don't want
thought,
you there. Just look it up the public TV. Exactly.
of course, and that makes sense, but again, I'm not 100% sure where I'd go, and I can't leave my son here while he's young, but no, I know, I feel completely,
It's terrible. What I find very remarkable, everybody, but the shock, I think, to a lot of people who just have had different life experiences, right? I don't even get into political views, right? But like people who had different life experiences. Um, a lot of, New York, I grew up in New York. A lot of New York Jews tend to be more liberal than not, right?
Mhm,
The
yes,
biggest shock I've heard has been from them, right? If you don't speak Arabic, you haven't worked in these places, are not aware of the deep cultural loathing.
yeah,
This is all a bit of a surprise.
yes, I could.
Um, right? The only positive I got is I'm not surprised. I don't know if that's much wonderful comfort, but yeah, this is horrible. A lot of people went to bed on October 6th last year as Americans, and they woke up on October 8th as Jews. And
That,
a lot of that shock is still settling in on them. They don't quite believe this is happening. How are there people marching in Brentwood on the high holidays calling for pogrom, and
I
the
know.
LAPD are not beating their heads in?
Right, right. I know. I've been shocked for a year. By the way, my battery might die. I don't know if
Oh,
I have. I think I'll probably figure out how to, like, maybe I could plug this in. Yeah, I know. I'm shocked too. I mean, I see these videos, and I'll tell you, I'll be honest, in all this time since last October, I've only ever seen one of these things in person once. I've been very lucky. Let's see if I'm gonna see if that works. I don't know, maybe. Is that gonna work? Um, I guess I'm lucky I stay away from Times Square and whatnot. But yeah, I saw a video of people on a train with masks and keffiyehs, and they're yelling oink oink piggy piggy or something. And I'm like, I can't
it's
fucking
it's
believe.
it's funny because why I respect everyone's decision, especially here in the South we're all armed, right? So another thing is these people understand deterrence, right? So this stuff doesn't happen here because if it happens here, you might end up dead and no one's going to care. The sheriff's going to tell your family to pay to ship your body home. So I walk around constantly. I'm in New York. I walk around with a Magen David this big everywhere I go, everywhere I go. And there was a protest
And your gun?
and where legal, a concealed carrier, absolutely not in New York because it's not legal. Um, but
When
everywhere,
you walk around like that, have you been harassed by anybody or?
nope. Because and even those who there were, at Union Square, there were a bunch of people yelling. And I was back, I don't know, a couple of months ago, and I walked straight at these two idiots. The little this crap.
Mm.
Walked right at them and stared at them, and they got the sense that this was probably not going to end well. Um, and so, I was on in New York with some friends of mine from a military foundation. So all of them make me look like a candy ass. They're all very highly trained, and there are six of us. And we were going out for lunch, and they were like, "Let's go find a protest. Really, let's go find one. Let's go up to Columbia. Let's go find a protest. Let's teach these children that there are consequences. One of the if you want some fun, I think it's Berkeley or UCLA. It's a great video. Bunch of these, idiot middle class white kids who are and all this crap. And it starts with one of them telling this guy, when you look at him, he looks like a California surfer boy, right? He's got like frosted hair, and they're yelling at him, and one of them says, "You can move along," right? Like he's a tough guy. And the guy stands in front of him and says, "I can do whatever I want. I'm an American combat veteran. And this is America, and I can do whatever I want." And all of a sudden, the four tough guys with the keffiyeh hiding their face, they suddenly like back off. These are all a bunch of pansies. The ones who are trained, they're looking for a fight, absolutely. But predominantly, most of these kids are chicken shit, and Rebecca and I would debate that a lot. Like, which is worse? When you go up to some of these idiots on Harvard Yard or Berkeley or wherever, Toronto, and they're chanting from the river to the sea, and you ask them, what's the name of the river?
What's the name?
90% don't know. And so, again, I don't know whether that's a positive or a negative. To me, it's a positive because it means that 90% of these guys are there because some cute chick said, hey, you want to come to the protest? He's like, yeah, totally. I hate the Jews, right? But they still went along with it, so that's bad. But it'd be worse if they were all like Nazis in Germany with like 2 PhDs and multilingual who will lay out for you with great erudition why they hate the Jews. I don't know which is worse, actually.
That's a good point. Yeah, I've seen a lot of those videos where these people are asked questions and they can't really answer. They don't know.
Just it's cool. You might get laid. You might get a donut. They handing out beer. Who knows, right? I mean, really, I remember that from reading a lot of books from the Vietnam era. That a lot of these, especially guys, would write. You keep pro Vietnam, whatever. I mean, Country Joe and the Fish were playing, or the Who were playing at this protest, and this cute girl I wanted to get with was going, so I went. Okay, right. So there's some proportion who are just there because
Yeah,
this is the thing to do.
that's right. That's right.
And if you
Yeah.
make it in southern universities where it's not the thing to do, because if you go to the pro-Palestine march, the campus police are going to beat you and arrest you.
Yeah.
Well, then suddenly that's not the thing to do. And you find something else to do.
The southern universities have been great.
They've been phenomenal. I mean, DeSantis said to all Jewish parents in November of 23, you want to transfer your kid down here, we'll find a spot for them in a school.
I read that. I saw that. In my group, we are nonpartisan, and we have to be nonpartisan because that's how I filed all the paperwork.
Yep.
With that said, especially as we get closer and closer to the election, there are a lot of opinions. So if you mention DeSantis, like you did, we'll have people praising all his actions, and then of course you have people saying, well, he book banned books and he did this and he did that. And I usually just look at it and I have to delete it because it turns into it turns into a huge problem. And so I try to keep that off the page with varying success. I don't have all day to look at it, but people report comments, and if they're overly political, I get rid of them. Yeah, it's hard. I think a lot of Jews, I've been a registered Democrat since 1981, and I'm struggling with it because I don't think the last, 4 years have been really good. I sort of like
1943, Representative Schroeder, whose parents moved to the United States from Germany, hangs a flag of Germany, which is the Nazi flag, outside of his office in the Rayburn Building, which is U.S. taxpayer office space. Rashida Tlaib has a Palestinian flag hanging in American public space. As far as I'm concerned, she's a traitor who should be arrested and prosecuted.
I so wish she would. I so wish she would go away. It's horrible.
She's awful.
Horrible.
And it's been a lie from the beginning. Her stunt when she first got elected, that the Israeli government won't allow me to visit my grandmother in Gaza. Right. You've been a lawyer. You've had plenty of money. You could have flown to Gaza anytime you wanted in your whole life. But you suddenly made it a point to go as a congressional representative, not as a private citizen. And the Israeli government, I don't care if you visit your grandmother. You can't visit her as coming as a political mission. And just awful people. Awful.
Yes. Oh, yes. The absolute worst. And I don't know in Florida. I noticed that in New York, suddenly there is this humongous amount of women in hijabs. Like all of a sudden, I got out of the train last week at 86th Street and I saw 5 of them in like 2 minutes. And I'm baffled, like where. I think that some percentage of them are people who are sporting it because it's like the thing to do. And because some of them are doing it like hijab style with scarves and all that. I feel constantly like on edge. And I didn't used to feel that way at all. I never really thought one way or the other. I didn't really feel I have any anti-Muslim bias or anything. But lately I feel, I guess, like frightened, not hatred or anything, just scared, and so
It's reasonable because
Um,
they've been lied to as much as part of the problem is a lot of these folks have been lied to, and um, couple the kind of cultural bias towards Jews to begin with,
yeah,
and then whip it up with I've got a bunch of Muslim friends that our we have maintained dialogue, but you know this is what I do for a living. I am part of the military industrial complex. We are investing in bullet factories to make sure the IDF is financed. This is what I do for my day job, right? So it's not even like I have an opinion. I am actively arranging investment into things that are going to be dropped on Islamist terrorists. So that's not particularly a political opinion. That's just true. And even then, we've tried to maintain civility. I imagine a lot of that will wane over time, because it's human nature to pick a team.
yeah, it
Sadly,
is.
I'm taking a lot of your time. Is there something that would be for anyone who's interested in, Mothers Against College Antisemitism? Is there something that they can be helpful with? Is there, letter writing and joining the group? Like what
Well,
will?
they should join our group, which you
Yeah,
can find on Facebook. It's called Mothers Against College Antisemitism. There's a lot of action items on there, and I just found out about the partnership we're going to have with somebody that's really going to be terrific. But I'm not allowed to say anything about it yet, or I'll get in trouble. So the first thing they could do is join us and get involved with us. And we especially need volunteers who are willing to go on campus. You don't have to yell, you don't have to scream. You're really just standing there with a sign. We're doing what we call proxy parenting, which means that none of us ever go to our kid's own school. So I already promised my kid I will not show up at NYU and embarrass him. He won't be like, oh, shit, there's my mom, but I'm willing to go to a CUNY or Columbia or something like that. We really need people to come out and join us. Even just being there as a presence is important. I was in Woodstock this summer and I'm walking along and there's a group of what I'll call, I don't know, old hippies, with the flags and. So I start having a discussion with them. I have a video of it on my page, and one thing leads to another. It doesn't end well. So I'm walking along and I walk past them, and then there's this other group of pro-Israel people, and they've got Israel flags and they're sitting there. And when I saw them, I just felt like it was a sigh of relief. Like, oh, there's somebody here on our team. We're not alone. And that's part of what we want to do with these Maccabees. They're just standing there with signs that say Mothers Against College Antisemitism. We'll get them cool shirts and hats, but I think it's just to show
everyone
people.
loves swag.
Yeah, yeah. It's just to show kids that they're not alone, that there are
Yep.
Jewish mothers out there who care about them and who, that just to feel supported so they're not alone. So yeah, join my group. A lot going on in there all the time. We always want people to help out, and that's what's going on.
Excellent. Well, it's been a delight. Thank you so much for taking the time. I love what you're doing. People who don't. What was that great line? That evil flourishes when good people stay silent.
That's
So thank you for not staying silent.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.